The metallic crack of gunfire echoed through the indoor range as Maria Santos adjusted her safety glasses for the third time in 5 minutes. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the rental pistol, a basic Glock 19 that felt foreign and unwieldy in her small fingers. Around her, the other shooters moved with practiced confidence, their stances perfect, their shots grouped tightly on distant targets that seemed impossibly small from where she stood. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "First time?" called out a voice dripping with condescension. Maria turned to see Jake Morrison, the ranger's self-appointed expert, watching her with barely concealed amusement. His expensive custom pistol gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his shooting vest bore patches from competitions she'd never heard of. "Maybe you should start with the ladies' beginner class on Wednesdays. This might be a little advanced. For you." The laughter that rippled through the nearby shooting stations burned like acid in Maria's chest. She nodded quietly, mumbling something about just wanting to try it once, and turned back to her target. What they couldn't see, what nobody at Precision Point Shooting Range could possibly know, was that Maria Santos had once been Staff Sergeant Maria Delgado, the finest marksman in the history of the 75th Ranger Regiment. Maria had perfected the art of being overlooked during her 3 years working the evening shift at Hartwell Medical Center. At 32, her dark hair remained pulled back in the same simple ponytail she'd worn since leaving the military, and her scrubs hung loose on a frame that had once been hardened by military training, but now carried the softness of civilian life. The patients she wheeled through endless hospital corridors saw her as just another face in the army of healthcare workers who moved through their peripheral vision like ghosts. The medical center buzzed with the controlled chaos of evening rounds. As Maria arrived for her 4 p.m. shift, her orthopedic shoes squeaked against polished floors that reflected the harsh institutional lighting, creating a rhythm she'd grown accustomed to over countless nights of pushing wheelchairs and moving patients. From room to room, the other transport technicians called her Silent Maria behind her back, a reference to her habit of completing her assignments without the casual chatter that filled most work shifts. What they didn't know was that Maria Santos was a carefully constructed identity, built from necessity and maintained through 3 years of meticulous self-discipline. The real story lay buried beneath layers of legal name changes, sealed military records, and a past that had been systematically erased by those who needed a scapegoat for their own failures. The original betrayal had come from Colonel Richard Sterling, her commanding officer in the Rangers, and a man she'd trusted with her life on 17 separate combat missions. Intelligence that had been classified above her security clearance had somehow found its way to insurgent forces, resulting in an ambush that killed 3 Rangers and wounded 7 others. When the investigation began, falsified evidence painted Maria as the source of the leak, a hotshot female sniper who'd gotten careless with classified information. The court-martial had been swift and devastating. Staff Sergeant Maria Delgado was stripped of her rank, her commendations, and her identity. Only Captain James Rodriguez, her former spotter and the one man who truly understood her capabilities, had believed in her innocence. But his transfer to a classified assignment came the day before he could testify on her behalf, and Sterling's network of corrupt officers buried the truth beneath mountains of manufactured evidence. Now, 8 years later, Maria existed in the shadows of her former life. Every patient she transported, every family member she comforted with quiet efficiency was both a reminder of how far she'd fallen and a testament to her ability to find purpose in serving others. She'd legally changed her name, altered her appearance enough to avoid recognition, and disappeared into the vast anonymity of civilian healthcare work. The small apartment she rented in a converted warehouse sat in the forgotten industrial district of the city, tucked between a defunct textile mill and a used auto parts yard. Inside, beneath a Murphy bed that doubled as her living room furniture, lay a metal lockbox containing 4 items: a tarnished Ranger tab from her dress uniform, a photograph of her with her sniper team taken after a successful mission in Afghanistan, a Bronze Star citation that had been voided by her court-martial, and a letter from Sergeant Michael Torres, one of the Rangers who had died in the ambush. The letter, written just hours before the mission that claimed his life, contained words that had sustained her through the darkest periods of her exile. "Sergeant," Torres had written in his careful handwriting, "you're the best shot any of us have ever seen. When the brass tells us to trust you with our lives, there's never any question. Keep watching our backs out there. We know you always will." Every morning at 5:30, Maria ran the same 6-mile route through the industrial district, her feet finding familiar paths through empty lots and abandoned buildings. The physical exertion helped quiet the constant noise in her head, the replaying of testimony that had destroyed her reputation and the faces of Rangers who had died because of Sterling's treachery. Her route took her past Precision Point Shooting Range, a high-end facility that catered to competitive shooters and law enforcement personnel. She'd never intended to enter the range. For 3 years, she'd jogged past the building without so much as glancing at the advertisements for advanced marksmanship courses that covered the windows. But today, something had been different. Maybe it was the anniversary of Torres's death weighing on her mind, or perhaps it was the conversation she'd overheard at the hospital between 2 police officers discussing their poor performance at quarterly qualifications. 23 out of 50 shots on target, one had complained to his partner. Department standard is 30. If I don't improve by next month, they're going to put me on desk duty. The comment had sparked something Maria had thought buried forever. Without conscious decision, she'd found herself standing at the range's front counter, credit card in hand, asking about rental fees and safety orientations. The young clerk had looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism, taking in her worn jeans and hospital ID badge still clipped to her shirt. First, time shooting? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The clerk had asked, already reaching for the beginner's safety manual. "We've got a ladies' introduction class that might be more appropriate. This is kind of a serious shooter's range." Maria had simply nodded and completed the paperwork, her handwriting betraying nothing of the muscle memory that guided her fingers through forms she could have filled out blindfolded. The rental Glock felt awkward in her hands after years away from firearms, but the weight was familiar enough to trigger memories she'd worked hard to suppress. Now, standing in lane 15 with Jake Morrison's laughter echoing in her ears, Maria faced a choice that would determine the direction of her carefully constructed new life. She could accept the role they'd assigned her, the fumbling beginner who provided entertainment for more experienced shooters, or she could honor the memory of the Rangers who had died trusting in her abilities. The target downrange seemed impossibly distant at 25 yards, a standard pistol distance that would challenge even experienced shooters. Jake Morrison had just finished a string of shots that produced a respectable grouping, most rounds finding the scoring rings with only 2, completely missing the target face. His friends clustered around his lane, offering congratulations and commenting loudly enough for everyone to hear about proper stance and breathing techniques. "Hey, sweetheart," Morrison called out to Maria, his voice carrying the casual cruelty of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his behavior. "When you're ready to try some real shooting, maybe I can give you a few pointers. These civilian ranges can be pretty intimidating for beginners." The comment drew chuckles from his companions. a group of recreational shooters who spent their weekends pursuing accuracy they'd never truly achieve. What they couldn't see, what the entire range full of people had no way of knowing, was that Maria Santos had once been considered the finest precision marksman in the most elite fighting force in the world. Her military record, now sealed and officially discredited, contained achievements that would have been considered impossible if they hadn't been witnessed by multiple reliable sources. 3 confirmed kills at distances exceeding 200 meters using standard-issue M24 sniper rifles. A single mission record of 17 enemy combatants eliminated during a 12-hour siege. Performance scores in advanced marksmanship training that had never been equaled by any soldier, male or female, in the history of the Ranger program. But that was before Colonel Sterling's betrayal, before the manufactured evidence that painted her as a security risk, before the court-martial that had stripped away everything she'd worked to achieve. Now she was just Maria Santos, hospital transport worker, invisible woman in scrubs who pushed wheelchairs and emptied bedpans for $12 an hour. The range safety officer, a retired police sergeant named Bill Hawthorne, approached her, laying with the weary expression of someone who'd seen too many beginners endanger themselves and others through ignorance and overconfidence. His clipboard contained standard safety reminders and basic shooting instructions that he'd recited thousands of times to nervous first-time shooters. "Ma'am," Hawthorne said, his voice professional but kind, "I notice this is your first visit. And to our facility, before you begin shooting, I'm required to review some basic safety protocols and shooting fundamentals. It's nothing personal, just range policy for liability purposes." Maria nodded respectfully, understanding that Hawthorne was simply doing his job and genuinely concerned about safety. Unlike Morrison's group, there was no condescension in the range officer's manner, just the careful professionalism of someone who'd seen what happened when proper procedures weren't followed. "First rule," Hawthorne continued, "muzzle awareness at all times. That firearm never points at anything you don't intend to destroy, whether it's loaded or not. Second, finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. Third, know your target and what's beyond it. Fourth, treat every firearm as if it's loaded, even when you know it isn't." The safety lecture continued for several minutes, covering stance, grip, sight alignment, and breathing techniques that Maria could have recited from memory. She listened attentively, maintaining the carefully constructed persona of the nervous beginner while her mind automatically catalogued the ranges, layout, sightlines, and potential safety concerns. As Hawthorne finished his instruction and moved on to assist other shooters, Maria found herself alone at lane 15 with a loaded pistol and the weight of 8 years' worth of suppressed memories pressing against her consciousness. The target, downrange, represented more than just paper and scoring rings. It was a test of whether the skills that had once defined her still existed beneath years of deliberate forgetting. Morrison's voice cut through her concentration like a blade. "Come on, hospital girl. Let's see what you've got. Maybe if you're lucky, you'll hit the backstop on the first try." The cruel laughter that followed his comment sparked something dangerous in Maria's chest. For 8 years, she'd endured dismissal, condescension, and the assumption that she was less capable than those around her. She'd accepted the role of the invisible woman, the overlooked worker whose contributions went unnoticed and unappreciated. But standing in that shooting lane, surrounded by the familiar sounds and smells of a range environment, Maria Santos began to remember who she had been before the world tried to destroy her. The trembling in her hands wasn't nervousness. It was the effort required to maintain a facade that was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. The first shot would determine everything. She could deliberately miss, fulfilling their expectations and maintaining her carefully constructed anonymity. or she could honor the memory of the Rangers who had died believing in her abilities. The choice, when it came, surprised even her. Her stance shifted almost imperceptibly, feet finding positions that had been drilled into muscle memory through thousands of hours of training. Her grip on the pistol adjusted with unconscious precision, hands working together to create the stable platform necessary for accurate shooting. The target downrange seemed to grow larger as her focus narrowed to the simple task of aligning the front sight post with the rear sight notch. Morrison's group continued their commentary, making jokes about beginner's luck and discussing their own shooting accomplishments with the exaggerated confidence of recreational enthusiasts. They had no idea that they were witnessing the emergence of someone who had once been considered among the finest marksmen in military history. The transformation wasn't visible to casual observers, but anyone with real expertise would have noticed the subtle changes in Maria's posture and demeanor. The nervous energy that had characterized her movements since entering the range was replaced by the calm focus of someone accessing deeply ingrained skills. Her breathing slowed to the controlled rhythm that had once been as natural as walking. Hawthorne, observing from his position near the range desk, felt a flicker of professional curiosity as he watched Maria's shooting stance. Something about her positioning suggested familiarity with firearms that went beyond the basic instruction he'd just provided. But he'd seen enough overconfident beginners to reserve judgment until she actually fired. The moment stretched as Maria made her final preparations, the weight of 8 years' worth of suppressed identity pressing against the carefully maintained walls of her assumed personality. Around her, the range continued its normal operations, recreational shooters pursuing accuracy they'd never achieve, law enforcement officers maintaining basic proficiency, competitive shooters honing skills that would never be tested under real combat conditions. None of them understood what they were about to witness. Maria Santos was about to disappear, and Staff Sergeant Maria Delgado was about to remind the world that some skills, once mastered, could never truly be forgotten. The ghost in medical scrubs was about to demonstrate why she had once been considered the finest marksman in the most elite fighting force on Earth. The first shot, when it came, would shatter more than just the silence of the range. It would begin the destruction of a carefully constructed identity and force Maria to choose between the safety of anonymity and the dangerous truth of who she really was. But she had no idea that her decision to honor the memory of fallen Rangers would set in motion events that would expose the corruption that had destroyed her life and demand a reckoning that was 8 years overdue. As her finger moved toward the trigger, Maria carried with her the weight of Torres's letter, the memory of Rangers who had trusted her with their lives, and the burden of truth that had been buried beneath layers of manufactured evidence and institutional corruption. The target downrange waited with infinite patience, ready to receive a message that would travel far beyond the confines of precision point shooting range. The transformation was about to begin, and Maria Santos was about to learn that some truths refused to stay buried forever. The first shot erupted from Maria's pistol with surgical precision, the sound cutting through the ambient noise of the range like a knife through silk. The brass casing arced through the air in slow motion, catching the fluorescent light as it tumbled toward the concrete floor. 25 yards downrange, the target received its first visitor in the exact center of the 10 ring, a perfect hole that spoke of skills far beyond anything a beginner should possess. Jake Morrison's laughter died in his throat as he stared at the electronic scoring display that confirmed what his eyes refused to accept. The woman he'd been mocking, the nervous hospital worker who trembled while handling the rental pistol, had just delivered a shot that surpassed anything he'd achieved in 5 years of recreational shooting. "Lucky shot," Morrison announced. loudly, his voice carrying a defensive edge that hadn't been there moments before. "Beginner's luck happens sometimes. Let's see if she can do it again." The second shot followed immediately, Maria's finger finding the trigger with mechanical precision. Her stance hadn't shifted by so much as a millimeter. Her breathing remained controlled and rhythmic, and her grip on the pistol maintained the perfect consistency that separated true marksmen from recreational enthusiasts. The bullet found its mark exactly 1/4 inch from the first hole, both rounds clustering in the center of the scoring area with mathematical precision. Around the range, conversations began to falter as shooters became aware that something unusual was happening in lane 15. The third shot joined its companions in a group so tight that the scoring system registered them as a single impact. In point, the fourth and fifth rounds continued the pattern, creating a cluster that would have been impressive at 10 yards, let alone the 25-yard distance Maria was engaging. Bill Hawthorne set down his clipboard and moved closer to lane 15, his experienced eye taking in details that the casual observers were missing. Maria's shooting position was textbook perfect, but more than that, it was the kind of perfect that came from thousands of hours of professional training. Her trigger control was flawless, each shot breaking with the same crisp precision that indicated muscle memory honed through extensive practice. "Ma'am," Hawthorne said quietly, positioning himself where only Maria could hear him, "I've been running ranges for 23 years, and I've never seen shooting like that from someone claiming to be a beginner. Mind telling me where you learned to handle a firearm?" Maria's eyes never left the target as she prepared for her sixth shot. "YouTube videos," she replied evenly, the lie delivered with the same calm precision that characterized her shooting. "I wanted to be prepared before coming to a real range." The explanation was absurd, and both Maria and Hawthorne knew it. No amount of video instruction could produce the kind of fundamental shooting skills that Maria was demonstrating. The way she manipulated the controls, her understanding of sight alignment, the unconscious adjustments she made for the pistol's characteristics. These were all indicators of professional-level training that took years to develop. Morrison's group had abandoned their own shooting to cluster around the electronic display that tracked Maria's progress. The scoring system showed 6 consecutive shots in the 10 ring, grouped so tightly that a silver dollar could cover the entire cluster. It was the kind of performance that competitive shooters spent decades trying to achieve, accomplished by someone they'd dismissed as an incompetent amateur minutes earlier. "This is impossible," muttered Steve Chen, one of Morrison's regular shooting partners. "Nobody shoots groups like that with a rental pistol, especially not on their first visit to a range. She's got to be sandbagging us." Morrison's face had cycled through confusion, anger, and something approaching fear as he watched his worldview crumble one shot at a time. His identity was built around being the range's unofficial expert, the man other shooters came to for advice and instruction. The idea that a nervous hospital worker could outshoot him so dramatically challenged everything he believed about himself and his place in the shooting community. "She's probably been practicing at other ranges," Morrison announced, his voice carrying a desperate edge. "Acting like a beginner to hustle people. It's a scam, probably trying to set up some kind of betting situation." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from discharged ammunition, drawing the attention of every shooter within earshot. Maria's 7th shot answered Morrison's claim with the same devastating precision as its predecessors, punching through the target exactly where her sight picture had indicated it would go. She wasn't shooting to impress anyone or prove a point. She was simply executing the fundamentals that had been drilled into her during 2 years of advanced military marksmanship training. Hawthorne studied Maria's technique with growing fascination and concern. He'd served as a police sniper for 8 years before taking the range safety position, and he recognized the subtle indicators that separated professional shooters from talented amateurs. The way Maria indexed her trigger finger, the natural respiratory pause she utilized for each shot, the unconscious scan for additional targets that followed each engagement, these were all hallmarks of someone with extensive tactical shooting experience. "Ma'am?" Hawthorne tried again, his voice carrying a note of professional courtesy mixed with growing suspicion. "I'm required to ask if you have any military or law enforcement background. Your shooting technique suggests formal training that goes beyond civilian instruction." Maria's 8th shot preceded her response, the bullet finding its mark with the same mechanical precision that had characterized every round she'd fired. "No military service," she replied, the words technically accurate since her discharge had been dishonorable and her service records had been sealed. "I work at Hartwell Medical Center, Transportation Department." The answer was true as far as it went, but it raised more questions than it answered. Hawthorne had seen thousands of shooters across his career, from nervous beginners to Olympic-level competitors, and Maria's performance fell into a category reserved for individuals with extensive professional firearms training. Her shot placement wasn't just accurate, it was consistent in a way that indicated the kind of muscle memory that took years to develop. Morrison's desperation was becoming more apparent with each shot Maria fired. His identity as the Ranger's alpha male was built on a foundation of perceived expertise that was crumbling in real time. The woman he'd been mocking was demonstrating skills that exceeded anything he'd ever seen in person, let alone achieved himself. His response was to escalate the situation in ways that would have consequences he couldn't foresee. "This is obviously some kind of setup," Morrison announced to the growing crowd of observers. "Nobody just walks into a range and shoots perfect groups without extensive practice. She's been lying about being a beginner, probably trying to make us look bad for some kind of social media stunt." The accusation was loud enough to carry across the entire range facility, drawing the attention of shooters in distant lanes who abandoned their own practice to investigate the disturbance. Maria's 9th and 10th shots continued their relentless precision, each bullet joining the cluster that had grown to encompass exactly the center of the target's scoring area. "Maybe we should make this interesting," Morrison continued, his voice taking on the aggressive tone of someone whose ego couldn't accept reality. "Let's see how good you really are under pressure. 15 shots, no misses, or you admit you've been lying about being a beginner." The challenge was issued in front of approximately 40 witnesses, creating a public spectacle that Maria had never intended to create. She'd come to the range, seeking a moment of private connection with skills she'd thought buried forever, not to engage in a public demonstration that could expose her carefully maintained cover identity. Hawthorne stepped forward, recognizing the potential for the situation to escalate beyond simple range management. "Gentlemen, this is a place of business, not a carnival. Everyone's welcome to shoot according to range rules, but I won't tolerate harassment of any customer." "It's not harassment if she's been lying about her experience," Morrison shot back, his voice carrying the desperate edge of someone whose fundamental beliefs were being challenged. "Real shooters don't just appear out of nowhere with skills like that. She owes us an explanation." Maria's 11th shot answered Morrison's demand with the same precision that had characterized every round she'd fired. The bullet found its mark in the center of a group so tight that the scoring system was having difficulty differentiating between individual impacts. She was shooting with the kind of consistency that competitive marksmen spent lifetimes pursuing, accomplished with a rental pistol and factory ammunition. The crowd around Lane 15 had grown to include nearly every active shooter in the facility, Word of the extraordinary demonstration had spread through the Range's informal communication network, drawing observers who abandoned their own practice, sessions, to witness something that most of them had never seen outside of professional competitions. 12 shots, Morrison announced, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and resentment. 12 perfect shots. But that's where it gets hard. The pressure builds, the hand starts shaking, the breathing gets irregular. Let's see what happens when you try to finish the string. Maria's response was to fire her 13th shot with the same mechanical precision that had characterized every previous round. The bullet joined its companions in a cluster that measured less than 1 inch across, a group size that would have been remarkable at 10 yards and was simply extraordinary at the 25-yard distance she was engaging. Hawthorne found himself caught between professional curiosity and growing concern about the situation developing in his facility. Maria's shooting was attracting the kind of attention that could lead to questions he wasn't prepared to answer. More troubling was his growing certainty that the woman in lane 15 possessed skills that went far beyond civilian marksmanship training. "Ma'am," he said quietly, moving close enough to speak without being overheard by the crowd, "I think it might be wise to conclude your session. This situation is getting out of hand, and I'd prefer to avoid any further complications." Maria's 14th shot preceded her response, the bullet finding its mark with the same devastating accuracy that had characterized every round she'd fired. "One more shot," she said simply, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to making critical decisions under pressure. "Then I'll pack up and leave." The final shot of what had become an impromptu demonstration carried the weight of 8 years' worth of suppressed identity. Maria's finger found the trigger with the same precision that had guided every previous shot. But this time, she was shooting for more than just accuracy. She was shooting to honor the memory of Rangers who had died trusting in her abilities, to vindicate skills that had been dismissed and discredited, and to remind herself that some truths couldn't be buried forever. The 15th bullet struck the target with finality that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent range. The scoring system registered the impact in the center of a group that measured 7/8 of an inch across, a demonstration of precision. That would have been impressive from a trained sniper using a precision rifle, let alone a hospital worker using a rental pistol. The silence that followed the final shot was broken by the sound of Morrison's pistol hitting the concrete floor, as his nerveless fingers lost their grip. Around lane 15, 43 witnesses stared at a target that displayed the kind of shooting performance that most of them had only heard about in stories from military and law enforcement professionals. 15 shots, Hawthorne announced, unnecessarily, his voice carrying a mixture of professional admiration and growing concern. 15 hits in the 10 ring, grouped in less than 1 inch. I've been in this business for over 2 decades and I've never seen anything like it. Maria began the process of securing her firearm and preparing to leave, moving with the same quiet efficiency that had characterized her work at the medical center. She'd accomplished what she'd come to do, reconnecting with skills that had once defined her identity and honoring the memory of fallen comrades who had trusted in her abilities. But the demonstration had attracted attention that went beyond the recreational shooters who formed the range's regular clientele. Dr. James Patterson, a trauma surgeon from Hartwell Medical Center who occasionally practiced at Precision Point, had witnessed the entire sequence from lane 23. His recognition of Maria sent a chill through the carefully constructed anonymity that had protected her for 3 years. "Maria?" Patterson called out, his voice carrying confusion and recognition. "Maria Santos from the Transport Department? What are you doing here, and where did you learn to shoot like that?" The question created a new dynamic in an already complex situation. Patterson's presence connected Maria's civilian identity with her extraordinary shooting performance, creating the kind of scrutiny that could unravel years of careful identity construction. She'd hoped to experience a private moment of connection with her former skills. Instead, she'd created a public spectacle that threatened to expose everything she'd worked to hide. Morrison, still struggling to process what he'd witnessed, seized on Patterson's recognition as validation of his growing paranoia. "You know her?" he demanded, his voice sharp with accusation. "Then maybe you can explain how a hospital worker shoots better than Olympic competitors." Patterson's medical training had taught him to observe details that others might miss, and his growing scrutiny of Maria was revealing inconsistencies that didn't match her carefully constructed civilian persona. The way she'd handled the firearm, her familiarity with range protocols, the unconscious tactical awareness she'd displayed throughout the demonstration. These were all indicators of professional training that went far beyond civilian instruction. "Maria works in patient transport," Patterson said slowly, his analytical mind working through the implications of what he'd witnessed. "She's been with the hospital for 3 years, always quiet, always professional. But this is something else entirely." The crowd around lane 15 had begun to disperse as the immediate drama concluded, but several observers lingered to discuss what they'd witnessed. Cell phone cameras that had captured portions of the demonstration were already uploading videos to social media platforms, creating a digital record that would soon extend far beyond the confines of precision point shooting range. Maria completed her weapon, securing procedures, and gathered her belongings, moving with the same quiet dignity that had characterized her work at the medical center. She'd come to the range, seeking a private moment of connection with skills that had once defined her. Instead, she'd created a public demonstration that threatened to expose everything she'd worked to hide. "Wait!" Hawthorne called out as Maria prepared to leave. "I think we need to talk about what just happened here. Shooting like that doesn't just appear from nowhere. There are questions that need to be answered." Maria paused at the lane divider, her back to the range safety officer and the crowd of observers who were still processing what they'd witnessed. "Some questions are better left unasked," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that spoke of experiences far beyond civilian life. "Some answers are too dangerous for the people asking them." The response did nothing to diminish the growing curiosity about Maria's background and the source of her extraordinary shooting skills. If anything, her reluctance to explain her abilities only intensified the speculation about her true identity and the experiences that had shaped her into someone capable of such remarkable precision. Morrison's voice followed her as she walked toward the exit, carrying the desperate edge of someone whose worldview had been shattered by 23 minutes of devastating accuracy. "This isn't over," he called out, though whether the words were a threat or a promise remained unclear. "People like you don't just disappear after something like this." The automatic doors of precision point shooting range closed behind Maria with the same quiet efficiency that had characterized her arrival 3 hours earlier. But the woman who emerged into the afternoon sunlight was fundamentally different from the nervous hospital worker who had entered. The demonstration had awakened something that 8 years of careful suppression had been unable to eliminate, and Maria Santos was beginning to remember who she had been before the world tried to destroy her. Behind her, the range buzzed with speculation and disbelief as witnesses attempted to process what they'd experienced. Cell phone videos of the demonstration were already spreading across social media platforms, accompanied by theories and explanations that ranged from the plausible to the absurd. Within hours, the footage would attract attention that would extend far beyond the recreational shooting community. Dr. Patterson remained at the range long after Maria's departure, his analytical mind working through the implications of what he'd witnessed. As a trauma surgeon, He'd treated enough gunshot wounds to understand the difference between lucky shots and professional-level marksmanship. What he'd seen from Maria fell into a category reserved for individuals with extensive tactical training, and he was beginning to suspect that his quiet colleague from the transport department harbored secrets that went far deeper than anyone had imagined. The afternoon sunlight felt different as Maria walked toward her pickup truck in the parking lot, carrying the weight of a decision that had fundamentally altered her carefully constructed existence. She'd intended to maintain her anonymity while briefly reconnecting with skills that had once defined her identity. Instead, she'd created a public spectacle that threatened to expose years of careful identity construction. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her supervisor at the medical center, asking if she'd be available for overtime shifts during the upcoming weekend. The mundane nature of the communication seemed surreal after what had just transpired, a reminder of the dual existence she'd been maintaining for 3 years. In one world, she was Maria Santos, the quiet transport worker who moved through hospital corridors without attracting attention. In another world, she was someone capable of shooting performances that defied explanation. As Maria drove home, through the industrial district that had become her sanctuary, she had no idea that the demonstration at Precision Point had set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately expose the corruption that had destroyed her military career. The cell phone videos spreading across social media platforms would eventually attract the attention of individuals who recognized the significance of what they were seeing, leading to questions that would demand answers about the true identity of the woman who had just redefined what was possible with a rental pistol and factory ammunition. The ghost in medical scrubs was about to discover that some demonstrations of skill carried consequences that extended far beyond the immediate moment. And that truth, once revealed, had a way of demanding justice that had been denied for far too long. The video that would change everything was uploaded to social media at 6:47 p.m. by Steve Chen, Jake Morrison's shooting partner, who had witnessed Maria's demonstration from beginning to end. The 43-second clip showed the final 5 shots of her performance, each bullet finding its mark with mechanical precision, while Morrison's voice provided increasingly desperate commentary in the background. Within 2 hours, the video had been shared over 1,500 times across multiple platforms. Maria discovered the viral nature of her demonstration when her phone began buzzing with notifications from co-workers at Hartwell Medical Center, who had seen the footage spreading through social media feeds. The comments ranged from amazement to skepticism, with many viewers questioning whether the performance was real or staged for entertainment purposes. But among the casual observers and recreational shooters, the video attracted attention from individuals with the expertise to recognize what they were seeing. Master Sergeant David Reeves, currently stationed at Fort Bragg and responsible for advanced marksmanship training for Special Operations Forces, stumbled across the video during his evening social media scroll. What he saw in those 43 seconds made him pause his dinner and watch the clip 17 more times with growing recognition and disbelief. The shooting technique displayed by the woman in medical scrubs wasn't just extraordinary, it was familiar in ways that triggered memories from his 12-year career in military instruction. "Sarah," Reeves called to his wife from their living room, his voice carrying an urgency that made her abandon her kitchen cleanup to join him on the couch. "Look at this video and tell me what you think. Professional opinion." Sarah Reeves had served 8 years as a military police investigator before transitioning to civilian law enforcement, and her trained eye immediately picked up details that casual observers might miss. The shooter's stance was textbook perfect, but more than that, it demonstrated a kind of unconscious competence that came from extensive professional training. The way she managed recoil, her trigger control, the automatic scan for additional targets after each shot. These were all indicators of tactical shooting experience that went far beyond civilian instruction. "David," Sarah said slowly, replaying the video for the 5th time, "this isn't recreational shooting. This is someone with serious military or law enforcement background. Look at her positioning, the way she indexes the trigger, the respiratory timing. This is professional level technique performed with rental equipment." The recognition that had been building in David's mind crystallized into certainty as he analyzed the shooter's fundamentals. But it was more than just technique that caught his attention. There was something about the shooter's movements that seemed familiar, triggering memories from his years of training elite marksmen. The more he studied the video, the more convinced he became that he was looking at someone he'd encountered during his military career. "I think I know who this is," David said quietly, his voice carrying a mixture of amazement and growing concern. "If I'm right, this woman was supposed to be out of the military years ago under circumstances that never made sense to those of us who knew her capabilities." Meanwhile, at Hartwell Medical Center, Maria was completing her evening shift while trying to process the implications of her afternoon demonstration. The mundane routine of patient transport felt surreal after the intensity of her performance at Precision Point, and she found herself moving through familiar corridors with a heightened awareness that hadn't been present during her 3 years of civilian employment. Dr. Patterson had remained unusually quiet during their brief encounters throughout the evening shift, but Maria could feel his analytical gaze studying her with new intensity. The trauma surgeon's medical training had taught him to observe details that others might overlook, and his growing curiosity about her background was becoming difficult to ignore. "Maria," Patterson said during a quiet moment between patient transfers, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone navigating unfamiliar territory, "I've been thinking about what I saw at the range today. That level of marksmanship doesn't develop overnight. It takes years of professional training to achieve that kind of consistency." Maria continued preparing a wheelchair for transport, her movements maintaining the same quiet efficiency that had characterized her work for 3 years. "Sometimes people have hidden talents," she replied evenly, the response technically truthful while avoiding the deeper implications of Patterson's observation. "Hidden talents don't explain tactical awareness," Patterson pressed gently, his medical background giving him insight into stress responses and behavioral indicators. "The way you handled that firearm, your familiarity with range protocols, the unconscious scan patterns you displayed after each shot, these suggest experience that goes beyond civilian instruction." The conversation was interrupted by a code blue announcement over the hospital's communication system, requiring Patterson's immediate attention in the emergency department. But as he hurried away, Maria understood that his curiosity wouldn't be satisfied by vague explanations about hidden talents. The demonstration had revealed too much to be easily dismissed or explained away. At 9:23 p.m., while Maria was completing her final patient transfer of the shift, her phone rang with a call from an unknown number bearing a North Carolina area code. She almost ignored the call, but something about the timing made her answer with cautious curiosity. "Is this Maria Santos?" The voice on the other end carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to command, though it was tempered with an uncertainty that suggested the caller wasn't entirely sure about the purpose of his contact. "Yes," Maria replied carefully, stepping into an empty patient room to ensure privacy for what was clearly going to be a significant conversation. "My name is Master Sergeant David Reeves, United States Army Special Operations Command. I've seen a video that's been circulating on social media, and I have reason to believe we may have served together at some point during my career. Would you be willing to discuss this in a more secure environment?" The words hit Maria like a physical blow, confirming her worst fears about the viral nature of her demonstration. The careful anonymity she'd maintained for 3 years was crumbling in real time, exposed by 43 seconds of muscle memory that she'd been unable to suppress during a moment of emotional vulnerability. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Maria said quietly, though even as she spoke the words, she recognized the futility of maintaining her cover story in the face of professional military scrutiny. "Ma'am," Reeves continued, his voice carrying the respectful tone of someone addressing a superior, "I've trained thousands of marksmen during my career, and I can count on one hand the number of individuals capable of the performance I witnessed in that video. If you are who I think you are, there are people who've been searching for you for years." Ubri. The call ended with Maria's hands shaking as she powered down her phone, but the damage had already been done. Professional military personnel with the expertise to recognize extraordinary marksmanship had identified her performance as something that went far beyond civilian shooting skills. The careful identity construction that had protected her for 3 years was beginning to unravel in ways she couldn't control. 2 time zones away, Master Sergeant Reeves was placing a secure call to Captain James Rodriguez, now serving as a training coordinator for Ranger School at Fort Benning. The 2 men had maintained contact throughout their careers, bonded by shared experiences in special operations and a mutual respect for excellence in military training. "James," Reeves began without preamble, "I need you to look at a video I'm about to send you. I think it might be someone we both remember from your time with the 75th. Rodriguez opened the video file on his secure tablet, watching with growing amazement as the woman in medical scrubs delivered a shooting performance that triggered immediate recognition. The technique was unmistakable, refined through years of professional training and honed to a level of precision that he'd only seen from a handful of individuals during his military career. "Jesus Christ, David," Rodriguez said softly, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and growing excitement. "That's Maria Delgado. I'd recognize that shooting style anywhere. But she's supposed to be out of the service, dishonorably discharged after that operation in Afghanistan." "The court-martial," Reeves replied, his voice carrying the bitter edge of someone who'd never accepted the official explanation for Maria's downfall. "A lot of us never bought into that story. The idea that the finest marksman in Ranger history would compromise operational security didn't make sense to anyone who'd actually worked with her." Rodriguez felt a surge of emotion that had been building for 8 years, ever since he'd been transferred away from Maria's unit the day before he could testify on her behalf during the court-martial proceedings. The timing had never felt coincidental, and his inability to defend someone who'd saved his life on multiple occasions had haunted him throughout his subsequent military career. "David," Rodriguez said quietly, "if that's really Maria in the video, then we might finally have a chance to get some answers about what really happened during Operation Desert Shield. There were too many inconsistencies in the official story, too many convenient transfers and sealed records." Naiji! The 2 career soldiers spent the next hour discussing the implications of Maria's apparent survival and her extraordinary demonstration of marksmanship skills that clearly hadn't diminished during her years in civilian exile. By the end of their conversation, they developed a plan to investigate the circumstances surrounding her original court-martial and the events that had led to her disgrace and discharge. At 11:45 p.m., while Maria was driving home through the industrial district that had become her sanctuary, a black SUV with government plates was pulling into the parking lot of Precision Point Shooting Range. The 3 occupants moved with the practiced efficiency of individuals accustomed to conducting investigations in environments where discretion was paramount. Agent Sarah Mitchell of the Army's Criminal Investigation Division had been following leads related to Colonel Richard Sterling's activities for the past 6 months, part of a broader investigation into corruption within Special Operations Command structures. The viral video of Maria's shooting demonstration had attracted her attention through automated monitoring systems that flagged unusual military-related content on social media platforms. "The range should be closed by now," Mitchell said to her 2 colleagues as they approached the facility's main entrance. "But the owner lives on site, and he's agreed to meet with us to discuss today's incident." Bill Hawthorne emerged from his residence adjacent to the range facility, wearing civilian clothes, but carrying himself with the posture of someone who'd spent decades in law enforcement. His initial cooperation with the federal agents was tempered by professional caution about discussing customers and their activities without proper legal justification. "Agent Mitchell," Hawthorne said as he unlocked the range entrance, "I'm willing to cooperate with your investigation, but I need to understand what this is about. The woman who shot here today didn't break any laws or violate any range policies." "Mr. Hawthorne," Mitchell replied as they entered the facility, "we're investigating potential connections between today's demonstration and an ongoing case involving military personnel who may have been wrongfully accused of crimes they didn't commit. We're particularly interested in the shooting technique displayed by your customer." The range felt different in the aftermath of Maria's demonstration, as if the extraordinary performance had left an invisible mark on the environment where it occurred. Hawthorne led the agents to Lane 15, where the target from Maria's session remained posted exactly as she'd left it. The tight cluster of holes in the center of the scoring area spoke to a level of precision that commanded immediate respect. "I've been running shooting facilities for over 20 years, Hawthorne said as the agents examined the target, "and I've never seen anything like what that woman accomplished today. The consistency, the precision, the familiarity with advanced shooting techniques, it all pointed to professional training that went far beyond civilian instruction." Agent Mitchell photographed the target from multiple angles while her colleagues reviewed the range's security footage from earlier in the day. The video quality was sufficient to capture Maria's shooting technique in detail, providing visual evidence of the extraordinary performance that had attracted federal attention. "Mr. Hawthorne," Mitchell continued, "did the shooter provide any information about her background or training? Anything that might explain her level of proficiency?" "She claimed to be a beginner," Hawthorne replied, his tone making clear how implausible he found that explanation. "Said she'd learned from YouTube videos and wanted to try real shooting, but her technique was flawless from the first shot. No learning curve, no adjustment period, just immediate professional-level performance." The agent spent another hour reviewing evidence and interviewing Hawthorne about the events of the afternoon, gathering information that would be added to a growing file about Maria's background and capabilities. By the time they departed, Mitchell was convinced that they'd identified someone with potential connections to their broader investigation into military corruption. At 2:17 a.m., Maria sat in her Spartan apartment, staring at the metal lockbox that contained the only physical reminders of her former identity. The tarnished Ranger tab seemed to reflect the overhead light differently than it had that morning, as if her afternoon demonstration had somehow awakened memories that had been carefully suppressed for years. Torres's letter lay open beside her, the careful handwriting still legible despite the years of handling. His words about trust and capability seemed prophetic in light of the day's events, and Maria found herself wondering what he would have thought about her decision to honor his memory through a demonstration that threatened to expose everything she'd worked to hide. Her phone buzzed with another notification from social media platforms, indicating that the video of her shooting was continuing to spread across the internet. The comments had evolved from simple amazement to increasingly sophisticated analysis by viewers with military and law enforcement backgrounds who recognized the significance of what they were seeing. One comment in particular caught her attention, posted by someone with the username Ranger Instructor 276, who had written, "That's not civilian shooting. That's professional military marksmanship at the highest level. Whoever this woman is, she's had extensive tactical training. The muscle memory doesn't lie." The comment had received over 300 likes and dozens of replies from users who shared similar assessments of Maria's technique and capabilities. The viral nature of the video was attracting exactly the kind of expert analysis that could unravel her carefully constructed civilian identity. Maria closed the lockbox and tried to sleep, but her dreams were filled with memories of Afghanistan, of Rangers who had trusted her with their lives, and of the betrayal that had destroyed everything she'd worked to achieve. She woke at 4:30 a.m. with the certainty that her afternoon demonstration had set in motion events that would ultimately force her to confront the past she'd been running from for 8 years. The morning shift at Hartwell Medical Center brought an unexpected development when Dr. Patterson approached Maria during her first patient transfer of the day. His expression carried the gravity of someone who'd spent considerable time analyzing a complex problem and had reached conclusions that demanded action. "Maria," he said quietly, ensuring their conversation couldn't be overheard by other staff members, "I received a call this morning from a federal agent who's investigating connections between yesterday's shooting demonstration and an ongoing military case. They want to interview you about your background and training." The words confirmed Maria's worst fears about the expanding investigation into her identity and capabilities. The demonstration that was meant to be a private moment of connection with her former skills had attracted federal attention and threatened to expose the carefully constructed anonymity that had protected her for 3 years. "What did you tell them?" Maria asked, her voice maintaining the same calm professionalism that had characterized her civilian employment, while her mind raced through potential responses and escape routes. "I told them I'd pass along their contact information and let you decide whether you wanted to speak with them," Patterson replied. "But Maria, whatever's going on here, whatever your real background is, these people seem to think you might be connected to something important, something that could help other people who've been wronged." The implication that her case might be part of a broader investigation into military injustice sparked something in Maria's chest that she'd thought buried forever. For 8 years, she'd carried the weight of knowing that Colonel Sterling's corruption had likely destroyed other innocent soldiers, but she'd never imagined that anyone with authority was investigating the systemic problems that had enabled her destruction. "Dr. Patterson," Maria said carefully, "some truths are dangerous to the people who reveal them. Some investigations put targets on the backs of witnesses who cooperate. I learned that lesson the hard way." Patterson studied her with the analytical gaze of someone who'd spent years reading human behavior in high-stress medical situations. "Maria," he said softly, "I don't know what happened to you in your past, but I've worked with you for 3 years. You're one of the most competent professional people I've ever encountered. If someone wronged you, if someone's still getting away with crimes they committed against you or others, maybe it's time to stop hiding." The conversation was interrupted by a trauma alert that required Patterson's immediate attention. But his words echoed in Maria's mind as she went about her morning duties. The idea that her cooperation with federal investigators might help expose the corruption that had destroyed her career and potentially save other soldiers from similar fates was simultaneously appealing and terrifying. At 10:15 a.m., while Maria was transporting a patient to the radiology department, her phone rang with a call from the same North Carolina number that had contacted her the previous evening. This time she answered immediately, understanding that avoiding the conversation would only delay the inevitable confrontation with her past. "Miss Santos," Master Sergeant Reeves began, "I hope you'll forgive the persistence, but I've been in contact with Captain Rodriguez, who served as your spotter during your time with the 75th Rangers. He's very interested in speaking with you about the circumstances surrounding your departure from military service." The mention of Rodriguez's name hit Maria like an emotional earthquake, triggering memories of missions they'd completed together and the professional partnership that had made them one of the most effective sniper teams in special operations history. The knowledge that he'd survived his military career and retained enough influence to investigate her case filled her with hope she'd thought permanently extinguished. "James is still in the service?" Maria asked, her carefully maintained emotional control beginning to crack as she processed the implications of Rodriguez's involvement in the investigation. "Captain Rodriguez is currently serving as a training coordinator at Fort Benning," Reeves replied. "He's never forgotten what happened to you, and he spent years believing that the official story about your court-martial didn't match the soldier he knew. If you're willing to speak with him, he thinks he might be able to help expose the truth about what really happened." The offer of vindication and justice that Maria had dreamed about for 8 years was finally within reach, but accepting it would require her to abandon the safety of anonymity and confront enemies who had demonstrated their willingness to destroy anyone who threatened their interests. The choice she faced was between continued hiding and the dangerous path of seeking justice for herself and other victims of military corruption. "Where would this meeting take place?" Maria asked, her voice betraying the emotional turmoil that his offer had triggered. "There's a federal investigation already underway into corruption within Special Operations Command structures," Reeves explained. "Agent Sarah Mitchell of the Army's Criminal Investigation Division has been gathering evidence about Colonel Sterling's activities and their impact on personnel under his command. Your case might be the key to exposing a broader pattern of corruption that's affected dozens of soldiers over the past decade." The revelation that Sterling was under federal investigation sparked a surge of emotion in Maria that she'd been suppressing for 8 years. The knowledge that other soldiers had potentially suffered similar injustices because of his corruption made her personal desire for vindication seem secondary to the broader goal of preventing future victims. "If I agree to cooperate," Maria said slowly, "what kind of protection would be available? Colonel Sterling had enough influence to destroy my career and fabricate evidence that convinced a court-martial board. If he's still active, still in positions of authority, coming forward could be dangerous." "Ma'am," Reeves replied, his voice carrying the respectful tone of someone addressing a superior officer. "Sterling died 18 months ago from complications related to alcohol-related liver disease. But his network of corrupt officers is still active, and they've continued the pattern of behavior that destroyed your career. Your testimony about his methods and the fabricated evidence used against you could be crucial to exposing their operations." The news of Sterling's death triggered a complex mixture of emotions in Maria that ranged from relief to disappointment that he'd escaped earthly justice for his crimes. But the knowledge that his network of corruption remained active and continued to threaten other soldiers made her decision easier than she'd expected. "Agent Mitchell," Maria said, making the choice that would fundamentally alter her carefully constructed civilian existence. "I'll cooperate with your investigation, but I want guarantees about protection for witnesses and assurances that this won't become another cover-up designed to protect the institution at the expense of the truth." 3 hours later, Maria found herself sitting in a secure conference room at the regional FBI field office, facing Agent Mitchell and Captain Rodriguez across a polished wooden table that reflected the fluorescent lighting like a mirror. The Reunion with her former spotter was emotionally overwhelming, bringing back memories of missions they'd completed together and the professional partnership that had made them legendary within special operations circles. "Maria," Rodriguez said softly, his voice carrying 8 years' worth of suppressed emotion, "I've never stopped believing in your innocence. The evidence against you never made sense to anyone who actually knew your character and capabilities. I'm sorry it took this long to find a way to investigate what really happened. The federal investigation that followed would span 6 months and ultimately expose a network of corruption that had affected over 40 military personnel across multiple special operations units." Maria's testimony about Sterling's methods and the fabricated evidence used to destroy her career provided the foundation for prosecutions that would result in 17 convictions and the dismissal of 6 officers from military service. The viral video of her shooting demonstration became evidence in multiple court cases, proving that her extraordinary marksmanship skills had never diminished and supporting her claims about the level of training and competence that made the original charges against her implausible. Expert testimony from Master Sergeant Reeves and other military professionals established that soldiers with Maria's capabilities and training would never have engaged in the kind of security breaches that had been attributed to her. The public vindication that followed was more complete than Maria had ever imagined possible. The Army issued a formal apology for the injustices she'd suffered, offered full restoration of her rank and benefits, and provided financial compensation that acknowledged the years of lost career progression and reputation damage she'd endured. More importantly, the investigation led to systemic changes in military justice procedures designed to prevent similar corruption from destroying other innocent soldiers. But Maria's response to the offer of reinstatement surprised everyone, including herself, standing before a panel of senior officers who'd offered her command of an elite sniper training program. She delivered an answer that would become legendary within military circles for its dignity and moral clarity. "Gentlemen," Maria said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd found peace through suffering, "I appreciate the gesture, but I've learned that vindication isn't the same as validation. I don't need official recognition to know my worth as a soldier or as a person. The Rangers who served with me knew my capabilities. The enemies who fell to my rifle knew my skills. That's enough." Instead of returning to military service, Maria established the Torres Foundation, named in honor of the Ranger who died trusting in her abilities. The non-profit organization provided legal support and advocacy for military personnel facing wrongful accusations or retaliation for reporting misconduct. Her unique combination of tactical expertise and personal experience with military injustice made her an effective advocate for soldiers navigating complex legal challenges. Jake Morrison's fate served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of arrogance and prejudice. The viral video of his humiliation at Precision Point became associated with broader discussions about respect, competence, and the importance of treating all people with dignity, regardless of their apparent status. His membership in various shooting organizations was revoked, and his reputation within the recreational firearms community never recovered. Dr. Patterson became one of Maria's closest allies in her advocacy work, using his medical expertise to support veterans dealing with trauma related to military injustice. His recognition of the inconsistencies in Maria's original cover story had been the catalyst for exposing a broader pattern of corruption that ultimately helped dozens of wrongfully accused soldiers. 2 years after the investigation concluded, Maria stood before a group of new Ranger recruits at Fort Benning, delivering a guest lecture about ethics, accountability, and the importance of supporting fellow soldiers against institutional corruption. Her presence as an instructor represented the complete restoration of her reputation and the recognition of her expertise by the military establishment that had once destroyed her. "The most important lesson I can teach you," Maria told the assembled Rangers, "isn't about marksmanship or tactics. It's about integrity. There will be times when doing the right thing puts your career at risk, when standing up for truth threatens your advancement, when protecting innocent people makes you enemies within your own organization. In those moments, remember that your worth isn't determined by your rank or recognition. It's determined by your willingness to do what's right, regardless of the cost." The Torres Foundation grew into a powerful force for military justice reform, with offices across the country and a legal staff dedicated to protecting service members who faced retaliation for reporting misconduct. Maria's shooting demonstration at Precision Point had become the foundation story of an organization that helped hundreds of soldiers navigate complex challenges while maintaining their integrity and dignity. The metal lockbox that had once held the painful reminders of Maria's destroyed military career now contained letters of gratitude from soldiers the Foundation had helped, photographs from successful legal cases, and commendations from senior officers who recognized the value of her advocacy work. But most treasured was a new letter, written in Maria's own handwriting and addressed to the next person who would face impossible odds. "Your worth isn't measured by their recognition," the letter read. "Your value isn't determined by their validation. Stand for truth, fight for justice, and remember that some victories are worth any sacrifice. The Rangers who trusted you were right to do so. Honor their memory by never giving up. MD." The industrial district where Maria had hidden for 3 years remained her home. But the woman who lived there was no longer running from her past. Instead, she'd learned that true victory wasn't about proving enemies wrong. It was about building something better from the ruins they'd created. The ghost in medical scrubs had become a force for justice that protected others from the corruption she'd survived. On quiet evenings, Maria still visited Precision Point shooting range, where her extraordinary demonstration had triggered the investigation that changed everything. Bill Hawthorne had preserved the target from her 15-shot performance, mounting it in a place of honor that commemorated not just exceptional marksmanship, but the courage required to step out of the shadows and demand justice. The viral video that had started everything continued to circulate on social media platforms, but its meaning had evolved beyond simple entertainment. It had become a symbol of hidden potential, of skills that persecution couldn't destroy, and of the importance of never underestimating people based on their apparent circumstances. Maria's story reminded viewers that extraordinary abilities often hid behind ordinary appearances, and that true strength revealed itself not in domination, but in the courage to stand for truth regardless of personal cost. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.